I'm going to talk to you today about augmented, mixed, and virtual reality and what each of these is and what the value of each is. I am a orthopedic surgeon specializing in shoulder surgery, and I work at the Massachusetts General Hospital. These views I'm going to express to you are not the views of my organization. They're my own personal views. I'm also a graduate of the executive program at HBS and a professor at the medical school. I'm going to just minimize my screen here so that you can see more clearly the presentation. This presentation was given recently at the Next Generation Healthcare meeting put on by the Healthcare Club at Harvard Business School in December of this year. This is my daughter, Christina. She's a second-year MBA student at HBS, and she helped organize this program and assisted with this presentation. I have some conflicts I just think would be appropriate to mention, and furthermore, that lends credibility to what I'm going to say to you here. I've been a design surgeon on many different devices for joint replacement and for sports medicine and arthroscopy. I have fellowship funding from industry for my fellowship program. I'm on a number of boards, some not-for-profit, some for-profit. I have royalty and consulting from several companies, and I hold stock as well from a number of companies with whom I work. And it's relevant that I point out that Precision OS is the company I'll be speaking about today, so consider my confirmation bias when I present to you. So how are innovation and value connected? Actually, I went to Harvard Business School to understand the answer to this question, and I was fortunate enough to meet many extremely talented and brilliant professors to help me with this journey. And I'll share with you a little bit of what I understand here. When I went to Harvard Business School, the concept of innovation was everywhere. And innovation is a experience or a topic that's really not always described the same by each individual, but we're not going to dive into that in great degree here. I founded the Codman Shoulder Society because E. Emery Codman was one of the first entrepreneurs and innovators in orthopedics. And he lived and made this statement about 100 years ago. He said, "Give me something that is different, for there's a chance of it being better." Well, of course, most of you will know Clayton Christensen, and he also wrote about the difficulty with innovation. And from his vantage point, he talked about disruptive innovation in healthcare. Regina Herzlinger, who was one of my professors, spoke about innovation in healthcare and why it was so difficult to accomplish this. So I decided to consider the episode of care when performing a joint replacement surgery on a patient from the standpoint of the digital technologies that might provide value. And the bolded technologies, as you see here, under preoperative planning and intraoperative execution and aftercare, are all areas that I have a particular interest in, that I've been working in. And we'll talk a little bit about these, but I'm mostly going to focus on something that's not on this list, which is education that comes before one even starts with a surgical procedure. So I chose this particular company as an example of how augmented reality creates value, and this is from their website. They point out that the physical world is three-dimensional and most data is trapped on two-dimensional pages and screens. And augmented reality is a set of technologies that superimpose digital data and images on physical objects and environments, thus closing that gap. AR improves how users visualize information, receive and follow instructions, and interact with products. And in its best application, AR becomes part of the product, and it also becomes part of the value chain. This is nowhere more evident than how augmented reality has disrupted industry processes by reducing errors and increasing productivity in factories. And Michael Porter and James Heppelman not long ago wrote an article in Harvard Business Review entitled "Why Every Organization Needs an Augmented Reality Strategy." Day in and day out, we have lots of examples of this. And by overlaying virtual objects onto the real world, we experience augmented reality in many of the things that we do, whether it's entertainment or it's actual information. Augmented reality is growing all the time in the products that we use. Now, if it does this, it's reasonable to imagine that it could disrupt healthcare. So it's been used to disrupt preoperative planning and operative execution. And it was Milgram and Kishino who described the reality-virtuality continuum. So if we look on the far left and we see reality, and we look at the far right and we see virtual reality, then in between is something that is called augmented reality and augmented virtuality. And I'm going to show you how this embodies mixed reality as well. So mixed reality is the ability to view objects anchored in the real world, which are virtual, and interact with these digital objects in real time. So even before we go in the operating room, here's an example of a three-dimensional representation of the patient's anatomy, which is obtained from a CT scan. And we've already done the operation, and we can look at the orientation of the implants and the anatomy that we're going to be dealing with. And we can do it both before we go in the operating room and once we're in the operating room, so we can use it for referencing during the surgery. This has the potential to significantly reduce errors. In fact, the future is here now because we've been developing navigation with mixed reality using marker-based guidance so that we can eliminate the instruments needed to guide us in the operating room and thus reduce cost and improve our accuracy, as you see here. Moore's law is the doubling of computing power about every 2 years or so. So this has led to the opportunity for impact-focused VR in surgical training. And if you follow the acceleration of technology on this curve, which is exponential, virtual reality, as it's applied to surgical training, would be at the very most vertical portion of this curve. So what is virtual reality? Virtual reality refers to a computer-generated simulation in which a person can interact with an artificial three-dimensional environment. And this can be done without the need for a laptop, without wires, and with very lightweight devices that we use. And we can simulate, as you see here, the operating room environment and all the steps of surgery, including the errors that one might tend to make and how to avoid those errors. So the potential to disrupt education and indeed the value proposition is very clear. As I'll show you in the next several slides, we can shorten learning curves, we can reduce surgical errors, and we can reduce the overall cost of education. Why is this important? Well, 50 million patients suffer from surgical complications annually. This is not just in orthopedics, this is in all areas of surgery. In the olden days, as you see here with this image of an operating room, surgeons learned by watching and assisting. Now, more than 100 years ago, William Mayo, who founded the Mayo Clinic, said there's no excuse today for the surgeon to learn on a patient. Yet look at the image on the right of this slide, and you'll see that that doesn't seem to add up. Halsted, also a famous surgeon, said the approach for education should be see one, do one, teach one, but that clearly is not something you can scale effectively. That's very clear when you realize that the number of surgical cases performed independently by a resident in their training is only about 1%. And all the other cases they do, someone's holding their hand or guiding them through the surgery. So they don't have the autonomy to learn themselves on how to make decisions and deal with difficult problems. In the traditional learning journey, proficiency is moving upward on the vertical and complications is downward. Then the time and cost is on the horizontal axis. And you can see that when you practice on a patient, this is a very expensive and slow process. This, I think, is clear traditional learning curve. Now, before I get to patients, there is a value for industry here that's quite compelling, and it certainly affects the overall total addressable market here. The value proposition for industry is to lower sales force educational costs, improve training in the operating room for the staff that assists the surgeons, create a competitive advantage for one company versus another through this approach, and lower customer acquisition costs. Here's an example of what I'm talking about. In addition, we can accomplish something that in the past has not been possible, and that's remote learning. That's meaningful remote learning with colleagues and peers present together. So, what would it be like if surgeons could work together in the same space without traveling? Not long ago, we did this with members of our surgical team in Vancouver, London, Ontario, in Canada, in Boston, and at the Mayo Clinic. I won't show you that recording, but I'll show you the demonstration that I did at Harvard Business School, where one of us was in Vancouver and the other two of us were in Boston.
All right, so I'm in a virtual room with John Bracken, who's our CTO. John, can you say hello to everybody?
Hi, everybody. Real pleasure to be with you all.
And so this room can hold up to 12 individuals. So we could potentially be from Vancouver, we could be from Chile, we could be from Argentina, we could be from Switzerland and the US together. And you might imagine that not just doing simple procedures, but we could have individual specific cases that we could analyze together. So if somebody wanted an opinion from across the ocean about the case that they're going to do tomorrow, they could have uploaded it into here and we could be doing it together.
John, do you mind?
Yeah, Dr. Lowe, do you want to swap places? Perfect.
By the way we allow someone to become an operator is we just fist pump.
We fist bump.
Does everybody understand? I also do two screens, so this is just a cartoon kind of representation. But this is just removing the ball part where we're going to do a joint replacement. You want to lift the bone out, you can sort of look at your cut and see where you are. It actually will give you feedback as to how you did, and you can replicate it again. It'll let you make mistakes in the process. And in any case, we go through different steps in doing this. So if you notice, John's getting closer here. John is actually the camera. So one of us is designated as the camera, so when he looks, you can see from different angles. And again, we're simulating each of the different steps associated with the surgery.
And when I'm doing it, I can feel the haptics from the controller to simulate what this drill would actually feel like in real life. And John, John can take it out and have a look too. So as you can see here, this is where the reamer just was, and this is where our implant's going to be going in. So we're able to simulate this before we do it in a real patient, and we're able to get some tactile feedback and some practice.
In any case, as you see, surgery is a series of steps that have to be repeated, hopefully without error. And being able to do this in 3D and get feedback on this is, I think, significantly more valuable than just reading about it.
Speaking of reading, this was a recent study done that compared reading about a surgical procedure to doing virtual reality training. And as you can see, virtual reality training offers the learner a faster process, which is more efficient and provides more technical skill than simply reading about an operation. In another study, the investigators compared video to virtual reality training and demonstrated that there's a decreased surgical error at a fraction of the cost when using virtual reality training. In this systematic review, looking at hip arthroscopy, it was clear that the complication rate and reoperation rate was significantly high in terms of the learning curve, and it took many cases to become proficient. That's particularly concerning when one considers that the fellows who learn how to do this procedure do less than 20 cases per year in the operating room. And most recently, in a prospective randomized study comparing cadaver training to virtual reality training, investigators found that the two techniques were equal in terms of the learning outcomes, but there was a fraction of the cost when one used virtual reality training compared to cadaver training. So if we consider the traditional learning versus the virtual reality learning, it's not unreasonable to say that this is an enhanced learning journey. Look again at the area under the blue portion of this graph, and you can see that with the addition of virtual reality, the learning curve is shortened and the speed by which one develops proficiency increases and the complication rate decreases. The late Sir Ken Robinson was a known expert in education, and his TED Talk on creativity was viewed over 60 million times. He said that the fact is that given the challenges we faced, education doesn't need to be reformed, it needs to be transformed. We couldn't agree more when it comes to surgical education. Medical education is faced with rising costs, just as most technology is. And it might surprise you to know that it costs about $500,000 to train one thoracic surgery resident over a 4-year period. So we believe that people learn when they need to. It is well known that with traditional learning methods, individuals typically forget about 75% of what they learned within 6 days. But with purposeful, decision-based, and systematic repetition, not mindless repetition, but systematic repetition, one may be able to remember 80% of what is learned over 60 days, and you would want your surgeon to have this ability. So how do we align learning science with education? I think I've given you some insight into that here. There are 20 million healthcare providers learning on patients. This model is not sustainable and is detrimental to the global healthcare community. I hope you'll agree with me that virtual reality may be a solution. Thank you.